New York City, 6 a.m. The sun rises. The city is preparing itself for yet another day. Coffee shops are opening. Yesterday's drunkards pour out of subway trains. Construction sites are resuming activities, if they stopped overnight. And people are getting ready to go to work. During the day, you can see busy people running around, screaming at each other, laughing or crying. You can see dogs playing in parks and squirrels, pigeons, house sparrows or seagulls wandering around and going about their day. New York City, 6 p.m. Coffee shops are closing, giving way to restaurants. Subways are filling up with people coming back from work, and construction sites are still buzzing. I've missed a part of this fine working machinery. No, I was not thinking of police sirens. I am thinking of one that can be seen when the sun sets. One that leads its life underground when trash is being thrown on the pavement. One that is feared, despised, poisoned and killed. You guessed it right. Rats. New York City is taken over at night by 2 million grey creatures of approximately 1.5 pounds each and the size of a back scratcher. And let's be honest, rats have us terrified.
Rat sightings are more frequent than they've been in a decade. The city's 311 service request line has received over 7,000 calls since the beginning of the year about rats alone. That's up 60% from 2019, just before the pandemic.
They may bite, they may gnaw electric wires and start fires, but what scares humans the most is that rats may spread disease.
The rat problem is one which is peculiarly a Harlem problem. It seems that every time the city announces a campaign against rats, the number of complaints of rat bites increases rather than decreases.
Rats have been a part of New York since the very beginning of the city's existence. They had settled in even before the English colonizers had come up with the name New York in 1664. They supposedly arrived by boat with the Dutch, who first settled along the Hudson River, which would mean that, in fact, rats have been in New York since the 1630s. The presence of rats began to pose a challenge for New Yorkers around the 1860s. That is when they began to be written about. There is some literature that refers to them as vermin. Until the 1920s, any response to the presence of rodents came mostly in the form of a reactive approach. New York's inhabitants would take measures once they had actually seen a rat. When the local authorities realized that reactive approaches were not enough, they decided to implement preventive methods. In 1921, the city launched a rat-proofing campaign, in addition to existing trapping and killing methods. Despite the multiple campaigns and the combination of reactive and preventive methods, the rats were still around. They were the talk of the town, and the rumours had only taken on a life of their own.
Have you heard the news? I don't want those bastards near me. Did you know that rats have no bones? That's how they can manage to get in anywhere. Yesterday, I saw a rat as big as a cat. Chills run down my spine just thinking about it. A rat started chasing me yesterday. The vermin is hunting us now.
No wonder that rats have such a bad reputation. In 2013, almost 100 years later, the local authorities announced a plan of mass sterilization of New York City's urban rats. A strategy that will supposedly reduce the rat population by lowering females' reproduction rates. Smart, huh? This approach, as good as it sounds, faced many obstacles. One of them being that we had no idea at the time how many rats there were in the city. How can we reduce the size of a population when no data is available on the number of rats? It was only a year later, in 2014, that statistician J. Auerbach came up with a rough estimate of no more than 2 million rats. 2 million rats share the city with humans and their companion animals, but also with a wide variety of urban wildlife. The biggest plan to date against rats was announced by Bill de Blasio, a former city mayor. The $32 million plan to get rid of rats involved the utilization of rat-proof trash cans, better trash management and pickup. De Blasio only had one thing in mind: make the greatest city on earth the worst place in the world to be a rat.
Well, we want to make sure that the greatest city in the world is the worst place on earth for rats.
Yet here we are. It's 2022 and rats are still a regular subject of discussion. Articles are still written about them in the media and they still constitute a public health hazard to New Yorkers.
The relationship between humans and rats has long been a rocky one, and it is still problematic, to say the least.
Urban rats' presence goes against the smooth and orderly running of New York's fine-working machinery. They consume humans' comestibles. They gnaw on anything softer than steel, threatening the collapse of human infrastructures, the start of fires, and the economic loss of several food service establishments and various local businesses. Nevertheless, urban rats participate in the economic success of exterminators and bait producers, New York City's saviors, those willing to do anything to solve what they call rat problems. But above all, rats can be the host of many pathogens. Escherichia coli, Clostridium difficile, Salmonella enterica, Bartonella, Streptobacillus moniliformis, Leptospira interrogans, and Seoul hantavirus, to name only a few. This is without mentioning the novel viruses that scholars discovered in 2014. Feel free to look at the article to find out more about the pathogens carried by urban rats in New York City at your own risk. In addition to being called a threat to the economy and to public health, rats are a nuisance, a pest, an opportunistic species. They are unwanted, filthy, disgusting, and vicious. Urban rats are the apotheosis of New York City's wildlife.
It goes without saying that interactions between humans and rats are undesirable or undesired for either humans or rats. But here is where the paradox comes in. Humans complain about a situation that they created and that they exacerbate by an undisciplined disposal of waste. And on top of this, we have companion animals' treat bowls left on the street, together with their droppings, that create an important source of nutrients for urban rats.
The maths are simple. As long as there is the holy triangle of resources, water, food, shelter, there will be rats.
This is a rat, right? I'm gonna touch it. I'm gonna touch it. Ah! It bit me! Oh my god, it bit me.
In 2017, in an academic article, scholars claimed that urban rat management needed to address a wicked problem. Nothing mischievous about this phenomenon. A problem qualified as wicked implies that it has multiple layers and involves a wide range of stakeholders from multiple backgrounds. In the case of rat management in the city, these scholars have identified 4 stakeholders: society, rat-infested property owners, namely the customer that will ask pest management companies to intervene, pest management companies and public health agencies, and 4, researchers. The coordination between these stakeholders has often proven to be challenging for 2 reasons. Firstly, they have different ways of measuring the success of an intervention, and they have a different perception of time. Some may want to get rid of rats as quickly as possible, whilst others may need time to investigate. Society, rat-infested properties, pest management companies and public health agencies will want a rat outbreak to be dealt with as quickly as possible. When a pest management company acts fast and exterminates all the rats as soon as the outbreak is identified, society, rat-infested property owners and public health agencies will consider the intervention to have been successful. Yet, researchers need rats to study their biology and their behaviours. A successful intervention would be the production of knowledge and of data. If researchers want to identify ways of mitigating the incidence of rats, they need to see how rats evolve in a given environment, what they like, what they are scared of, and what they are repelled by. These processes can take a long time, and they cannot be conducted when or if rats are no longer alive. Other challenges arise for the researcher. When an outbreak is identified, scholars need to have access to the site to collect relevant data about the rats. However, having access to a rat-infested property can be challenging because rat-infested property owners may not want to share the fact that their properties are infested.
There may be a certain degree of shame in admitting being infested by rats because an outbreak is usually associated with poor sanitation. And on top of that, rat-infested property owners may be afraid of society's retaliation and a subsequent bad reputation.
I think you are starting to get why scholars call urban rat management a wicked problem.
Researchers need to fill the gap in knowledge on urban rats by studying them, which is a timely process. But the production of knowledge is laborious when the access to rats is so difficult, or when other stakeholders have already intervened.
Taking every stakeholder's interest into account is no easy task, and scholars understand that the impact of rats must be relieved as quickly as possible. First, to avoid arousing suspicion and provoking rat hysteria within society, but also to prevent exposure to rat urine or feces that may put citizens at risk. A call for collaboration between these 4 stakeholders was launched. However, collaboration is arduous, and for stakeholders to engage in such collaboration, certain resources will be required. Funding, of course, and, most importantly, time.
Researchers are currently thinking through ways of rewarding each stakeholder for their collaboration, be it through good publicity for pest management companies or through financial compensation for rat-infested properties.
I think you understand the title better now. Humans versus rats. It is only after centuries of struggles, of tensions, of a war against rats that we have started hearing about interspecies politics and policies.
I'm hopeful that things are changing, but we're getting ourselves into deeper issues and more complex matters.
Change is unpredictable. Imagine if humans began to consider rats as residents or denizens who have a certain set of rights and responsibilities. Imagine that instead of the conventional kind of relationship, we were to establish a relationship of justice with rats. Logically, rats would start changing their behavior if we started to change ours.
There is no single answer to the question, what would a better scenario be? Nevertheless, the book Zoopolis is filled with guidelines. It is a matter of interpreting these guidelines and adapting them to urban rats in New York City.
To quote Sue Donaldson and Will Kimlicker, any viable scheme of coexistence in shared territory requires mutual restraints and accommodations. Now, what that means is that if humans and rats are to coexist in the city, there will be regulations and adjustments to be made. It seems fair. Most of us know this from having shared space, for instance in playgrounds, at school, at work, and even in our own homes. It is all about compromise and remembering that our freedom is restricted by the freedom of others.
One major goal with the denizenship model is to reshape the human view of rats and consequently to change our behavior towards these animals. By shifting our mentalities, we find new ways of interacting with rats and we learn to live with them.
Humans can then enter a new era of problem resolution, in which humans have consideration for and respect rats' basic rights to live a life free of vulnerability, danger and abuse. All of this presupposes that humans and rats have minimal interaction. Urban rats benefit from our shared ecosystem, but not from the presence or the care of individual human beings. Remember?
Another goal is to reinstall a natural system of population control, one that includes population dispersal, competition with other non-human animals, and predation. This is different from eradicating all rats, which is, quite frankly, not possible.
To create a new model for our relationships with rats, we must recognize that rats do not have the same definition of public and private space as we do, and they cannot be held accountable for regulating their behavior in relation to humans. Therefore, it is up to humans to create a framework and a reasonable plan of accommodation, one that respects rats' basic rights, takes their interests into consideration, and is designed to mitigate the risks that humans might generate for them. At the same time, it should address humans' concerns about safety, aesthetics, and other aspects. As good as this sounds, it is very challenging to find solutions which balance humans' concerns and interests against the need to ensure that rats do not end up being worse off. When Bill de Blasio announced his $32 million plan in 2017, he focused mainly on trash collection and management, but there is a lot more to establishing peaceful coexistence between rats and humans than measures of that order. A new model implies a more comprehensive plan.
If we are to consider rats as our co-denizens, we have to be proactive. I came up with a 4-pillar plan inspired by Zoopolis, and each pillar involves various ways of improving the urban rat-human relationship in 2 respects. Firstly, by reducing urban rat-human interactions, and secondly, by inspiring a change in humans' perceptions of rodents.
And so, what are these 4 pillars? The first pillar, shaping the habitat, is all about transforming and adapting the city to urban rats, with the aim of reducing interaction between rats and humans, but also with the aim of allowing the re-emergence of rats' predators and competitors. A whole range of strategies could be employed to this end. Take the creation of rat corridors. They would reduce interaction between humans and rats, allow population dispersal, and at the same time protect rats from roads, construction sites and other areas in which they are vulnerable. However, will rats use these pathways? Further research may provide an answer. Next, there are non-lethal physical fences, nets and barriers that could help control the movement of liminal animals, hence reducing urban rat-human interaction and allowing population dispersal. And then there are disincentives such as warning devices, annoying sound systems and unpleasant but harmless chemicals, all of which can play a part in transforming rats' habitat. And this can all be done whilst caring for and considering humans' interests, if these devices are placed in well-targeted areas. Another strategy, which has already been mentioned by so many policymakers, is that of trash collection and management. Pest exclusion, with measures such as houseproofing, is also a strategy that will help to reduce interaction between rats and humans. You seal up areas of a building before rats even get a chance to enter. These measures go hand in hand with limiting sources of food and nesting sites. The second pillar is adjusting urban rat population demographics via reproduction rates. That is self-explanatory. With the help of birth control vaccines or edibles, we may find a way of lowering rats' reproduction rates. However, we believe that this strategy cannot be implemented on its own. Which brings us to pillar number 3, relocation. There are 2 options that could be explored to help to reduce interaction between rats and humans. You find a whole mischief of rats in an abandoned building, say. Instead of using rodenticides to deal with them, we could relocate these rats and provide food for them, gradually decreasing the quantities of food until the rats are able to fend for themselves. Another relocation option would be to determine or to identify opportunities, places for rats to settle and to flourish. This could be done in areas where there are few to no people around, and this strategy would also allow the re-emergence of predators and competitors. Relocation may be stressful for them at first, but it could be carried out in a lenient manner to minimize rats' levels of stress. Of course, there will always be interaction between rats and humans, but we could make transformations in such a way that this interaction is beneficial, or at the very least neutral, for all parties involved. Last but not least, the 4th pillar, and probably the most challenging of them all, shifting human mentalities. This pillar is made up of 3 measures that would catalyze a transformation in the relationship and allow it to flourish. First, we would need to rethink the use of rodenticides, bait and poisons, making sure that they are properly regulated and not used indiscriminately. Secondly, to transform New Yorkers' perceptions of rats, we should implement positive rather than negative public education campaigns. The Rat Academy is a good example. And they could include locating and managing populations in a spirit of coexistence instead of creating negative campaigns of elimination or deportation. These campaigns have proven to be effective in other contexts, but they are challenging to put into place. The third measure is intangible, and this is probably why it is the most difficult to apply. To achieve peaceful coexistence between humans and rats, we humans must acknowledge our wrongdoings and our role in creating human-animal conflicts. We should start aiming for greater transparency and consistency in our policy making, our practices and actions that directly or indirectly impact non-human animals, independently of whether our actions are taken by individuals or collectively.
It's going to require a major effort to approach rats in a new way, but who knows? It may be worth a try.
As good as the plan sounds, all of these measures and initiatives will require a lot of money, time and energy. But are rats enough of a nuisance to push New Yorkers to reform policy in their regard? Are rats important enough for us to transform the status quo? This model may be beneficial, but it is also challenging to put into place for several reasons. First of all, from an economic point of view, managing rat populations differently may help local authorities and New Yorkers to save a considerable amount of money in infrastructure repair and in pest control. Yet, lower demand for rodenticides and pest management services will weaken the pest management industry that may be inclined to overcompensate with increased activity in the management of plant pests and insects.
We would also need to figure out whether the financial costs of investing in rodent research and of implementing rat corridors, birth control, annoying noise systems and other initiatives are lower than the cost of maintaining our usual rodent control responses.
Environmentally speaking, less use of rodenticides and the re-emergence of rats' competitors and predators are ways of increasing the city's biodiversity. However, if there is an increase in the management of plant pests and insects, there may be environmental harm of a different kind which might outweigh our current scheme of rodent control.
In addition to all of these measures, we might think of a scheme permitting the transformation of the pest management industry. They could, for instance, redirect their activities away from extermination towards relocation.
When it comes to public health, sanitation and safety, if humans manage to reduce interaction between urban rats and humans, it is to be assumed that there will be less exposure to diseases carried by urban rats, and if humans ensure that electrical wires are safely installed and that urban rats do not have access to them, we can reasonably expect that there will be fewer safety hazards. However, a lot of other hazards persist, and we are unaware to what extent rats constitute a public health threat in comparison with other non-human animals or other threats such as air pollution.
Even if this model, or a version of it, works in New York, it cannot be guaranteed that it would work elsewhere, and rodent control is linked to other issues in the city. And some studies show that rat sightings are more frequent in lower-income neighborhoods. And so in that respect, rodent issues also involve improvements in human social welfare.
Elevating rats' moral status may not be easy because of all the stigma that rats endure, and it may be that anti-stigma safeguards would be difficult to put into practice.
Instead of focusing on the hazards that rats bring, we could acknowledge all the things we impose in return with our cars, rodenticides, electric cables, wires, and so much more. But of course, would minimizing exposure to those dangers actually increase urban rat welfare in the city? We should first agree on a definition of urban rat welfare.
All the initiatives, measures and strategies that we have discussed are said by scholars to be more effective than the traditional methods that we are currently pursuing. Because killing rats leaves a void that will, sooner or later, fill up. And you see, all of these measures require a lot of money, time and energy. But is New York ready for a change in its urban rat management? Only time will tell.
Above and beyond an explanation, the hope is that it might be possible to change hearts and minds. But I guess I have learned that sometimes whether you win over the sympathy of your audience is not important. What is important, in fact, is to provoke thought and maybe a little disagreement, a little doubt, a little uncertainty about what we think we are well acquainted with. Rats are not aliens. They don't belong somewhere else. And denying those dynamics of exclusion or invisibility causes much harm to humans' relationship with urban rats, but also with other non-human animals. And remaining in a blissful but fabricated state of comfort will not improve the urban rat-human relationship. I am aware that I'm not going to improve the situation alone, or change the world by making a documentary. And maybe the model of denizenship applied to rats in New York City, or a version of it, is so far down the road that I won't even witness it. And who knows, maybe I'm just wacky. Or maybe I'm a visionary. Yeah, I'd like to think that I'm a visionary, but most people still think I'm crazy for caring about rats. Just imagine, for a second, a world in which rats and humans simply coexist. There are fewer tensions, less interaction. It's more tranquil. Humans are not in awe of rats. They don't love them. But they begin to accept the idea of both communities belonging in the same city and existing side by side. Actually, it's denial that I'm scared of. But what is even scarier is resistance to taking the leap, to trying, to investigating, to testing. Fear of failure, even fear of success. Today, tomorrow, and the day after that, I will try. I will investigate. I will test things. I will fail. But eventually, I will succeed. People always told me that the rat problem was a human problem, but I always wondered whether there wasn't more to it.